Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this third video in a series looking at the TOEFL reading section of the TOEFL test. In this particular video we're going to be looking at signal words and inference questions. We briefly looked at using signal words in part 2. We're going to be looking a little bit in more detail at these important part of the reading. So it's going to help you a lot. Let's have a look at remind ourselves of the 10 question types. In the second video, we looked at the find factual information and understand negative facts part of the TOEFL. We're going to be moving on, and we're going to be looking at making inferences and inferring rhetorical purpose in this particular tutorial. If we start off by looking at what is actually an inference and how do we make one. An inference is making a logical guess based on available information that helps us to draw a logical conclusion. Now, one thing that we've mentioned before is that conversation situations that you see on the TOEFL, these are not real conversations. These are they're the essence of a conversation. They're a staged conversation that is just a way of presenting facts to you. In the same way, making an inference on the TOEFL is different from making an inference in real life. So, for example, if we have this situation, we'll have a look at two situations to give us a brief idea of how it's going to be different. So if we look at situation A, your friend walks in the front door with an umbrella in his hand and his clothes are wet. What can we infer from this? Situation B, your friend has his car keys in his hand and is going out the front door. Where is he going? Now, in situation A, your friend is holding an umbrella, his clothes are wet, he just comes in the front door. We have enough information to infer that obviously it's raining outside. Now in situation B, if your friend has his car keys in his hand and he's going out the front door, where is he going? We don't exactly know where he's going. He could actually be going anywhere in his car. We don't know that for sure. We know that he's going there in his car because he's got his car keys. So the first place that he's going to be going to is his car. We don't know what his final destination will actually be, but he's going to use his car. Probably. I mean, he just could have just picked up his car keys because he's been looking for them. We don't have enough information in this situation to make a logical conclusion about what the final destination is going to be. Looking at question type 3, the inference questions. This is going to be making a conclusion based on information in the text. You need to look out for questions that begin with some of these wording like this. It is likely that, it is possible that, it can be inferred that, or it is suggested that. So look out for these questions. These are the inference question types. As we used before, we're going to be using the ETS Quick Prep download, the rise of Teotihuacan, and the inference questions are questions 6 and 7 on if you're reading along. I do recommend that you actually go and get this, go and download it. It's free from the ETS website, and you can go through the text in a little bit more detail than I will be able to on this video, on these slides. So let's have a look at question 6. Which of the following can be inferred from paragraphs 2 and 3 about the volcanic eruptions of the late 1st millennium BC? A. They were more frequent than historians once thought. B. They may have done more damage to Teotihuacan than to neighboring centers. C. They may have played a major role in the rise of Teotihuacan. And D. They increased the need for extensive irrigation in the Teotihuacan Valley. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to scan for the information. We need to look at the question first of all. We're going to be looking at trying to find some information about volcanic eruptions and the. So if we have a look at the actual text, we need to scan through the text and try and identify the information that we need to use to answer this question. So what does it say volcanoes? Is there anything about eruptions in this text? And is there anything about the first millennium BC? So we can see towards the end of paragraph 2, the first millennium BC is referenced quite a number of times. But what you'll find out is that it actually leads on into paragraph 3, and oftentimes what you'll find is that the information is going to be in a proceeding paragraph after you've actually read through kind of like a short introduction in paragraph the preceding paragraph. So in paragraph 2 here, we have got some mention of the volcano eruptions, and the first millennium BC is mentioned. And also there will be other details that will be expanded on in paragraph 3. So you can see that the kind of the top third of the third paragraph, around this time, the largest of these centers was seriously affected by a volcanic eruption. So it actually talks about this, but it's actually talking about a different city. And this is where this idea of signal words comes in. Signal words are involved in a variety of words that help to signal or indicate what you're about to read, or it shows how ideas link together. We touched on this very, very briefly where in the previous video we were looking at things giving additional and supporting information, or extra factors that were involved, as well as the main ideas. There were lots of minor contributing factors that would affect change. So we saw some of them in action in that second video. Signal words work between sentences to link them together, inside sentences to connect information together, and between paragraphs to link paragraphs together. Now, we can't go through all of them. We can't go through all the different kind of signal words that you'll expect to find in the reading passage. We can give you some examples, though. Sequence words. We've got words like first, secondly, then, after that. These are used to describe usually a process. If you're looking at give an example, or you're looking at illustrate an example, you can use for example or such as. Oftentimes on the TOEFL, you'll find a lot of technical vocabulary, a lot of academic vocabulary, and this will actually be defined for you. The new words that you come across will actually be defined for you. So you'll come across definition signal words like this is called or known as, and then they will actually give you the name of what the actual process is called. If you're looking at cause and effect, you can look out for things like as a result or in effect. And if you're looking to compare and contrast things, you can expect to see language like on the contrary or on the other hand. As I mentioned, this is not an exhaustive list of sequence words. This is not an exhaustive list of signal words, sorry. It gives you some general idea as to what to look for and how to identify them. They'll help you when you're scanning through, especially. This is where the idea of improving your general English comes in, where we won't be actually giving you an exhaustive list of every single detail, every single signal word, every single connector, every single way of starting a subordinate clause. You need to do this research by yourself. We can give you the general idea, we can give you some examples, but we're just limited by time in this particular tutorial. When it comes to locating signal words, the good news is that signal words are found in some very typical locations. They're found at the beginning of sentences, often followed by a comma. They're found in the middle of sentences, separated by a comma or semicolon. And they will be at the beginning or near the end of the paragraphs. Now, signal words in academic texts like this can help you because they help you to identify how the academic text is actually organized. All the readings on the TOEFL are academic in nature. Remember, we're trying to kind of recreate a textbook, a university textbook situation for you as best we can on the TOEFL. So all the readings on the TOEFL are academic in nature, but each text requires a specific organizational structure. We touched on this earlier when we were talking about genre and some of the expectations and how these expectations can actually help us predict how it's going to be organized and where the information is going to be. Which is where we need to introduce this idea of active reading. We've already looked at skimming and scanning. Scanning is using the question to help you find out where the information is, and then you can answer the question, so you're using the question as a guide. Skimming is giving you the general idea and the general organization of the text. Active reading is something a little bit different. Active reading is when you have some deep understanding of it, and it's where you're looking for understanding the organization. That is to say that you're reordering in order to understand connections. You're able to actually reorder the information and understand how things are connected together, how the main ideas are connected together. And you're also able to paraphrase information. Paraphrasing involves using synonymous ideas to rephrase text and eliminating any unnecessary information that might be in the text as well. So now if we go back and we look at the text that we've got to work with, we need to be looking for information connected with volcanic eruptions and the first millennium BC. If we look at the start, there is a mention at the start of paragraph 2, how did this tremendous development take place and why did it happen in the Teotihuacan Valley? Now, the next sentence starts among the main factors, and then it goes on to list the main factors of the obsidian resources in the valley itself, the valley's potential for extensive irrigation. There's nothing really much about volcanoes here. So we need to move a little bit further down. Now, at the end of the last sentence, we have the sequence word here, finally. And it says, finally, the impact of natural disasters such as the volcanic eruptions of the late first millennium BC. So we can see that in paragraph 2, there isn't actually a significant amount of information that's going to help us answer this question. The information is actually mentioned at the end of paragraph 2. If we look at the start of paragraph 3, it begins by referencing the volcanic eruptions. The last factor is at least circumstantially implicated in Teotihuacan's rise. So what the TOEFL has actually done here is actually prepared us with paragraph 2, but the information is actually in paragraph 3. So we need to focus on paragraph 3. So the last factor being the volcanic eruptions. This is actually going to go into more detail. So as we read down, we can see that the sentence that begins around this time, the largest of these centers, and there's also a mention of a new city, Quilquilco, which was, it says here, which was seriously affected by a volcanic eruption. Much of its agricultural land was covered by lava. Lava obviously connected with volcanoes and eruptions. As we move forward, Quilquilco eliminated as a potential rival, any one of a number of relatively modest towns might have emerged as a leading economic power. So it looks like the bulk of the information that we need to look at isn't actually in paragraph 2. It's at the end of paragraph 2, but it's actually discussed in more detail in paragraph 3. So we can see that there's a lot of time-related signal words in this reading. And we need to think to ourselves, what kind of academic text is organized in this way? Or the organization and the genre of the text is going to help us a lot. Now, this particular one is a history text. The events are organized in chronological order, and the signal words and time-related vocabulary indicate when certain events happened. So we're using sequence signal words to show how one event happened before another. They're going to happen in what we say chronological order, which is time order. So it's going to start with the beginning and end with the end. It's not going to start with the destruction of something at the end of Quilquilco being destroyed and then work backwards to discuss its right. It's going to start with the right and then move forward in time. So if we have a look at this, let's have a look at the way that we can paraphrase this information and the way that we can extract the main ideas of information from this paragraph. So the first thing that we can notice is that the evidence shows that Teotihuacan became the center of power in the region around 100 AD. Other towns had the opportunity to become a political power, but some of the natural disasters prevented that. In the case of Quilquilco, it was the fact that the agricultural land was covered by lava from a volcanic eruption. So you can see, because of a volcanic eruption, Quilquilco was no longer a threat to Teotihuacan. So we can get these points simply by actively reading. We need to be a little bit more involved in the text, and we need to be able to extract some of the key points and be able to rephrase them and paraphrase them into our own words, so that we can better understand the text and so that we can better answer the question. Active reading, therefore, is a dynamic process where we need to become more involved with the text to better understand it. It is not required that you reorder or paraphrase information, but you will understand it much better if you do. So if we go back to question 6, which of the following can be inferred from paragraphs 2 and 3 about the volcanic eruptions of the late 1st millennium BC? Even though we don't actually have the text in front of us, we can take a pretty good guess at what is actually going to be inferred. So A, they were more frequent than historians once thought. Well, not really. I mean, if we look at the text, it doesn't really mention anything about the volcanic eruptions being more frequent or less frequent. So I think we can discard option A. We look at option B. They may have done more damage to Teotihuacan than neighboring centers. Well, I think that the general thing that we took away from the reading of paragraph 3 was that Teotihuacan actually did quite well out of these volcanic eruptions, and it was the other cities like Quilquilco that were suffering because of these volcanic eruptions. Unfortunately, obviously they had no fields because the fields were covered with lava. So we can pretty much discard that one as well. We look at option D. They increased the need for extensive irrigation in the Teotihuacan Valley. Now, this is actually mentioned, but the context that it's mentioned in is not the context of things like volcanic eruptions causing damage. It did mention that the increasing population was fed by the number of fields was increasing, and that the amount of irrigation that was going on in the fields was increasing as well because of the growing population. But it didn't actually mention that this was because of volcanic eruptions. So from looking at this, from the active reading, we can actually infer that the volcanic eruptions may have played a major role in the rise of Teotihuacan, by helpfully eliminating its neighbors, by helpfully eliminating potential problems from its neighbors in cities like Quilquilco. Which leads us on to the possible versus the provable. Inferring things is a little bit difficult, and it relies essentially on a frame of reference. Now, if your frame of reference is somewhat misplaced, then it can be a problem. So we always, as a general rule, we always need to really focus on what is provable by the text, what is provable by the evidence in the text, rather than what is possible in your imagination. So determining an inference is not the same as determining what is possible. You need to draw a conclusion based on the reading, and you need to have a look to see that there is some supportive evidence actually in the reading. The TOEFL does help us in giving us choices to eliminate. There will be some, like we said when we were discussing the process of elimination before, there will be some answers in the answer stem that are completely wrong, and we can quite happily and confidently disregard those. Obviously, in real life, there could be more than one, but in the test, there can only be one real answer. We're going to be looking at this a little bit further on in the listening, where, like we've said before, that these are not real conversations. The conversations and the texts that you see are actually texts that you will be exposed to in a university environment, but it also has to be engineered in a certain way so that the answers, so that there's actually a definite right answer that no one can debate that the answer is correct, and also there needs to be some solid wrong answers as well that leave no room for debate or confusion that the answer is actually wrong. Now, the test makers don't want to make the test too hard when it comes to these questions. It doesn't want you to list and get caught up in possible answers or possible situations that could have happened. So you need to try to identify the answer choice which contains synonyms or synonymous information, because if you just get wrapped up in all the possible possibilities, then you're going to spend a lot of time wasting time, and you're gonna run out of time and not be able to answer the questions as you should be. So going back to question 6, we can see that there are these answers that we've got here, these answers in the answer stem, are actually, you can actually defend them. They are actually incorrect, and it's possible to defend the fact that they are incorrect as well. So moving on to question 7. What can be inferred from paragraph 3 about Quilquilco prior to 200 BC? A. It was a fairly small city until that date. B. It was located outside the Valley of Mexico. C. It emerged rapidly as an economic and political center. And D. Its economy relied heavily on agriculture. Now, if we take a moment to look through the text, we can scan through and try and find the key points that we're looking for. Looking like we did at the other questions, if we look at the first sentence, this last factor is at least circumstantially implicated in Teotihuacan's rise prior to 200 BC. A number of relatively small centers coexisted in and near the Valley of Mexico. Now, this is the sentence is actually referring to the last sentence that was mentioned in paragraph 2. So, to answer this question, we're going to need to look a little bit further through the paragraph here. If we look down to the next sentence, around this time, the largest of these centers, Quilquilco, was seriously affected by a volcanic eruption, and much of its agricultural land covered by lava. So we've got this word agricultural here, which leads us to look at the point that the answer to the question is going to be centralized around these 2 or 3 sentences here. So if we go back and we have a look at the answer stems, the answer choices with the paragraph, it was a fairly small city until that date. Okay, so if we look through the last factor is at least circumstantially implicated in Teotihuacan's rise prior to 200 BC. A number of relatively small centers coexisted in and near the Valley of Mexico. It mentions a number of relatively small centers that coexisted in and near the Valley of Mexico, but it doesn't mention Quilquilco specifically. So I think that we can cross off answer A here. Looking down at answer B, it was located outside the Valley of Mexico. Now, because we've got these, in this first sentence here, a number of relatively small centers coexisted in and near the Valley of Mexico, I don't think that we can actually use answer B here, because we have this idea that there are a number of small centers in and near the Valley of Mexico, not outside the Valley of Mexico. And the largest of these centers, Quilquilco, was in and near the Valley of Mexico. So I don't think that we can actually, there's really not much evidence here to support the idea that Quilquilco was located outside the Valley of Mexico. So I don't think that we can use B as an answer here. C, it emerged rapidly as an economic and political center. If we look forward through, with Quilquilco eliminated as a potential rival, any one of a number of relatively modest towns might have emerged as a leading economic and political power. It actually mentions quite early on in the start of the third sentence that Quilquilco was eliminated as a potential rival. and that any other of the relatively small towns might have emerged as a leading economical and political power. So I don't think that we can use C here. The two kind of leading answers here that we can actually kind of keep back and using a process of elimination reduce down to our basic answers is going to be either B or D, I think. C, rapidly emerging as an economic and political centre, we can't really use that. And it was a fairly small city at that date. Well, the text explicitly mentions that the fact that Quilquilco was the largest of the centres that coexisted in and near the Valley of Mexico. So we'll look at B and D. B, as we've said, the actual wording in the sentence uses in and near the Valley of Mexico. So it actually specifically mentions in, but it doesn't specifically mention that Quilquilco was in or near. So I think that we have to assume that it was in, at least, or near. It doesn't say anything about being located outside the Valley of Mexico. So I think that we can confidently say that D, its economy relied heavily on agriculture, is the most likely answer. If we have a look at the sentence, Quilquilco was seriously affected by a volcanic eruption, with much of its agricultural land covered by lava, with Quilquilco eliminated as a potential rival. So the next sentence starts off with the actual fact that the agricultural land was covered by lava, and that meant that Quilquilco was eliminated as a potential rival in terms of economic and political power. We can actually confidently say that the answer is D, that is inferred here by using the two ideas and the two sentences together. So when we're looking at rhetorical questions, we're going to move on to inferring rhetorical purpose. So this is going to be when asking you why an author chose a particular wording or chose you to tell you a specific fact. These question types are easy to spot because they start off with why does the author state, or what purpose does the author have. We're going to have a look at question 12 here. In paragraph 6, the author discusses the thriving obsidian operation in order to A. explain why manufacturing was the main industry of Teotihuacan, B. to give an example of an industry that took very little time to develop in Teotihuacan, C. illustrate how several factors influenced each other to make Teotihuacan a powerful and wealthy city, or D. explain how a successful industry can be a source of wealth and source of conflict at the same time. So if we move on and we have a look at the paragraph here, the paragraph 6 that we're supposed to be looking at, the first thing that we need to ask ourselves is, are there any signal words that we need to be aware of before or after the reference that was mentioned in the question? So if we go back and have a look at the question, the author discusses a thriving obsidian operation. So we need to be looking at this specifically, the thriving obsidian operation here. The picture of Teotihuacan that emerges is a classic picture of positive feedback among obsidian mining, working, trade, population growth, irrigation, and religious tourism. The next sentence starts off with the thriving obsidian operation. So if we look at this, we've got this signal word here, for example, which is giving us an illustration of a point, would necessitate more miners, additional manufacturers of obsidian tools, and additional traders to carry the goods to new markets. All this led to increased wealth. So this is the idea of this increased wealth here, which in turn would attract more immigrants to Teotihuacan. So let's have a look at the answers here, along with the paragraph. If we have a look at the way that we can paraphrase the information in the paragraph, we can say that Teotihuacan is a traditional story of the positive connection among the different industries and situations. An example of this is the obsidian operation. The situation required more workers, more tools, and more traders to buy and sell the product. And this process made more money for society and brought in other people from other areas. So if we can have a look at the paragraph and we can extract the main ideas, and then we can list them very briefly and list out the main ideas and how they link together, then we'll have a better idea of how we can actually link things together and eliminate choices that may or may not be right. Also, we need to bear in mind that we need to be looking for these signal words. So at the start of the sentence, we have the thriving obsidian operation. Then we have the signal word, for example, which goes on to list things that we need to be aware of that the thriving obsidian operation brought. So here it's saying that it necessitates more miners, additional manufacturers of obsidian tools, etc., etc., etc. It goes on to list all these things using this signal word, for example. The next sentence starts off with all this led to. So this is now a sentence which shows you the result of the thriving obsidian operation. So all of this led to increased wealth, which in turn would attract more immigrants to Teotihuacan. So there's these things around the main sentence. We can look for these key signal words that tell us whether we should be reading right to the end of the paragraph or not on these things here. So we can see here that all of this, all this led to increased wealth. This is actually showing us that the idea is actually coming to a conclusion, and we've got quite a long list of things here that we can use to help answer the question with. So let's have a look at how we can link these ideas in the paragraph to the answer step. So if we have a look at answer choice A, explain why manufacturing was the main industry in Tier 2 account. Remember, we're trying to link this idea of the thriving obsidian operation to the idea that manufacturing was the main industry in Tier 2 account. It doesn't really kind of mention this a lot. It doesn't really mention this as the main industry. Positive feedback among obsidian mining and working, trade, population growth, irrigation, and religious tourism. So it actually does mention the idea that there's trade and religious tourism going on here, as well as obsidian mining. So I don't think that we can use option A, answer choice A here, as a relevant answer here, because there are more areas of industry being mentioned. Trade and religious tourism is being mentioned, as well as the thriving obsidian operation. So I think that we can remove option A from our choices. B, give an example of an industry that took very little time to develop in Teotihuacan. Now, if we look through the whole thing, now, as I said, we only really need to read up to the third sentence. All of this led to increased wealth. We don't really need to go any further on than this, because it just gives us kind of furthering illustrations of what the effect of the thriving obsidian operation was, and how Teotihuacan grows and things like that. So what it doesn't mention explicitly here, this is one of the more important things to spot, is what it doesn't mention is that it doesn't give you any type of time frame here. There's no mention of any time scale or how long it took for the obsidian operation to become successful, or for the people to become wealthy. It just says things like the growing power, or emerging, a classic picture emerging. It doesn't actually say anything about the timescale from when the obsidian operation started to when the obsidian operation started to bring in all the money to Teotihuacan. So I don't think that we can actually use B here. We can probably keep A, I guess, but B definitely we can lose. We can lose absolutely. It doesn't really mention any timescale at all. C, illustrate how several factors influenced each other to make Teotihuacan a powerful and wealthy city. If we have a look here, then even in the first sentence, there's a big long list of things. Mining, working trade, population growth, irrigation, religious tourism. There were more miners coming in, there were more people making obsidian tools, there were more traders coming in to carry the goods to the new markets. All of these things led to increased wealth, which in turn would attract more immigrants to Teotihuacan. So there is actually quite a large body of evidence that we can use to support option C. So we'll keep that. And D, explain how a successful industry can be a source of wealth and a source of conflict at the same time. Now, while we've got this idea that the obsidian mining operation brought in a lot of money, there's actually no real mention that there were any much fighting going on. We've got this idea of conflict, but there is no mention of a conflict with who. The only thing that's mentioned here is Teotihuacan. The only thing that would be relevant here would be the mention of some kind of a civil war, which obviously isn't mentioned either because all these people, the growing power of the elite, they control the economy, and they actually physically coerce people to move to Teotihuacan and made additions to the labor force. There's no mention of any fighting going on. There's no mention of any conflicts. There's mention of people being coerced, physically coerced here. But I don't think that this is kind of going around and kidnapping people and kind of forcing them to come and work as slaves in the mines. So I don't think that we can use D here either as an answer choice. So we've got remaining choices. Once we've got rid of B and D, we'll have A and C. Now we already dismissed A because the obsidian mining operation wasn't the main the main industry of Teotihuacan. There were actually some other things going on here as well. There were traders were carrying the goods to the new markets. They were presumably selling these things in the markets. People were making obsidian tools. And more miners were working in the obsidian mines. So it's not just the main industry here. There's also religious tourism, there's trade, and there's the idea of population growth, where people were coming in and bringing more money in by working more, paying more taxes, and bringing more money in. So I think here that the answer choice C, to illustrate how several factors influenced each other to make Teotihuacan a powerful and wealthy city, is the most likely answer choice that we can give here. And it is actually the answer. In our final thoughts, inference questions ask you to draw a conclusion based on the text. Type 3 inference questions also ask you to find the answer choice that uses the same idea, but worded in a different way. Type 4 answer questions ask you to determine the author's purpose in choosing certain language or facts. There are a number of common TOEFL tricks that you'll come across in answering these types of questions. They're using answer choices that contain exact wording of the text, using answer choices that present a partial idea or partially correct information, and using answer choices that misrepresent information or get the order of the information wrong. So you really need to look through the answer choices that you're given, and you need to look at paraphrasing the information that you see in the paragraph that you're asked to read through. As we saw in this tutorial, active reading becomes more important as you try to understand more and more text. You're actually having to read through, and you're actually having to kind of come up with a summary so that you can reference the main points more directly in the text. Inference questions require more reading and require, obviously, you to take in more information than the previous question types that we looked at. Remember that active reading involves understanding the organization of a text, paraphrasing the information, and reordering the information. Bear in mind that active reading is a dynamic process, and it's possible to be performing all three of these actions at the same time. So when you're looking at making a summary from your paragraphs, looking at making a summary of the information in the paragraphs, you need to understand the organization of the text, you need to paraphrase the information, and you need to be able to reorder the information to make sure that you'll be able to answer the question. Thanks for watching. That's the end of this tutorial. In the next video, we'll be looking at vocabulary questions and reference words. See you next time. If you have any questions, please do leave them on the website, and we'll get back to you as soon as we're able. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again. Bye-bye.